What? What's going on, everybody? Oh, let me fix my hair light really quick. Realize it. Yeah, we're gonna turn it off. Yeah, we're done. You. All right. Sorry about that. The light was not working with me today. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics Podcast Cipher, and today we have a lot of news coming at you pretty quick here. We should be having about 2 hours worth of news. We're a little late started because I was a little late getting home. So, you know, whatever. It happens. Excuse me. But yeah, we're going to be covering the Sound of Freedom movie probably towards the end of the show. We're going to cover some SCOTUS stuff and some more information. There we go. Better lighting there for y'all. And we'll be covering other stuff. So yeah, we're going to get into it. Before we do, we're going to talk about some of the stuff we're doing. So I am now on Blue Sky. So if you use Blue Sky, you can find me at CSP Cipher. At Blue Sky. Another thing is that we will be doing more debates. We are being invited onto many debates now, or at least I am, because I did a pretty good job on the modern day debates, the first modern day debates debate I had. So we got contacted today to do another gender debate. We'll see if that comes through or not. Hopefully it does. I think we did pretty well this past Saturday. Or Sunday rather, did pretty well this Sunday. and it was good. The debate was solid. It was I think it was one of the better debates. Not much happened as far as getting off the rails. Everybody was making their points pretty well. So yeah, I don't know if any minds were changed by it, but I think the debate itself was pretty good. So you can find that on the YouTube page there. So before we get into it, yeah, smash that like button for the algorithms. If you're watching on YouTube, it really helps us out. Even if we end up taking this video down, the likes still help us. So yeah. We still plan on doing a Cipher State episode, hopefully at the end of the month. We're looking at the 30th or so. And we are still looking to have the highly produced video essay about AI coming to you, hopefully this Sunday. If not Sunday, because I need to still record it and edit it. If not this Sunday, it will definitely be the following week. So it'll be the week of the 24th at the latest. So it might happen the same week that we do the Cipher State episode. If you're wanting to get a hold of us to get on any of these panels, we're trying to do more of that, trying to be more active and more have more of the stuff on there, then go ahead and hit us up on the Discord. Discord is the easiest place to get to us. We rearranged our Discord. We're going to be doing every other Wednesday stuff, maybe just on Discord if we don't stream it. Hangouts in the Discord if I don't have anything going on as far as being on other people's shows that happen on Wednesdays. Every other Wednesday is what we're looking to add to our program. So if you want to hang out or whatever, talk, ask me questions, what have you, even if it's not streamed live, we'll be hanging out in Discord unless I am in a debate or on somebody's panel every other Wednesday. You can also still find us on Twitter, although that's becoming less and less. Twitter is no longer fun. It's not no longer fun because Elon Musk took over per se. He's just making a bunch of bad decisions. It's making it less of a good time. Allowing people to pay to get boosted for $8 a month, and then my feed is nothing but blue check marks of people I don't give a shit about. That's not what the algorithm was for. They basically broke the magic sauce that made Twitter useful. And yeah, so losing it less and less. You can get a hold of us on Mastodon at csp@federated.press. It's another easy way to get a hold of us. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the show here. All right. Oh, why did it do that? Annoying. 1 second, we'll get started here. All right. Up first is news from Russia's war on Ukraine, largely based on reporting from The Guardian. The NATO summit ended with encouraging news for Ukraine membership into the NATO alliance. The G7 signed a declaration outlining support for Ukraine and help towards governance reform needed for a Euro-Atlantic aspirations. The member nations said they would provide security and economic support, including modern military equipment across land, air, and sea, and intelligence sharing. Now, this is Euro-Atlantic, so this is talking about the alliance, the Euro alliance that they're trying to build up that is in addition to NATO. So NATO has its own mission, and the Euro-Atlantic alliance is designed to be a force multiplier on top of that. For reasons we'll get into maybe. Now, also included is the training of Ukrainian forces in exchange for Ukraine committing to reforms. Quote, to underscore its commitments to democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights, and media freedoms, put its economy on a sustainable path, and strengthen democratic civilian control of the military. Those are the things that they want from Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky welcomed a good result from the NATO summit. In regular remarks made on Thursday night, Zelensky struck a positive note, saying that, quote, for the first time since independence, we have formed a security foundation for Ukraine on its way to join NATO. Alliance leaders said they were removing obstacles on Ukraine's membership path so that it can join more quickly once the war with Russia is over. For many, that argument for many that augments augments for many that argument gives Russia's leader a pretext to prolong the war, which President Vladimir Putin ostensibly launched to keep Ukraine from joining NATO. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told ABC News, Good Morning America, that all 31 alliance members agree Ukraine's future is in NATO. If Ukraine were to join NATO in the middle of the war, then Russia would be at war with the entire NATO alliance. At the core of this conundrum is Article 5, NATO's Common Defense Guarantee. Article 5 states that an armed attack against one or more of the members of the 31 nation alliance should be considered an attack against all its members. It also states that if such an attack occurs, each of the members would take individually and in concert with other members, quote, such actions as deems necessary, including use of armed forces, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. The security guarantee is the reason previously neutral Finland and Sweden sought to join NATO and why Ukraine and other countries in Europe also want into the alliance. The alliance also unveiled the new NATO-Ukraine Council, a forum designed to facilitate consultations and meetings involving Ukraine and the 31 member nations. Ukraine has received cluster munitions from the United States despite the controversy around these weapons. Ukraine has said it will use cluster bombs only to deoccupy its territory and that it would not use them in urban areas. Russia, Ukraine, and the US have not signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which bans production, stockpiling, use, and transfer of these weapons. Now, what these weapons essentially do, the way they work, is that it is considered, picture a artillery shell that goes up, right? It goes up, and then before it reaches its target, so say its target is here. Its target's here. Before it reaches its target, it deploys a bunch of basically small grenades that blow up in the area. And this can be devastating, obviously. And the reason why there's a lot of countries that signed on to banning of these weapons is because they basically indiscriminately kill anything in whatever the radius of the blast that's there. It's not precision targeted. And so if you're in an urban warfare environment, you're going to get a lot of collateral damage. So that's why a lot of countries signed on to banning these. The thing is that these weapons are actually really good at clearing out trenches because, well, they blow up, and so they're essentially similar to an artillery shell, but over a wider area. So that wider area that we're talking about is why they're pretty much banned. But of course, Russia, the United States have not signed on to that because it removes a tool of war that is very effective. That's what we have here. Now, the decision to send the munitions to Ukraine has been opposed by Spain and Canada, while Britain said that it was part of a convention that discouraged use of such weapons. Some Democratic lawmakers also raised their concerns. The Russian embassy, for its part in the United States, has condemned the decision. President Putin said on Thursday that supplies of new weapons to Ukraine would change nothing on the battlefield, but would only further escalate the conflict there, according to Reuters. Putin, speaking on state television, also said that tanks provided by Western powers to Ukraine would be a priority target for Russian forces fighting there. He reiterated his opposition to Ukraine joining NATO, saying this would threaten Russia's own security. Well, if they cared about their own security, they shouldn't have invaded in the first place. To be quite frank, this fact that this is considered an existential crisis to Russia, to Putin, is just kind of their fault because they made other people want to join NATO and strengthen the alliance that is NATO. And so it kind of backfired on them. Say what you want about the Prigozhin defection and how there seems to be weird stuff with that, or how the fact that Ukraine still hasn't won the war despite Russia's inability to gain additional territory after losing some of the territory initially gained in its blitzkrieg, and that sort of thing. But it's just what it is. I don't see this war ending this year, mind you, but I don't think it's going to drag out too much longer, especially if China does not start supplying Russia with munitions and weapons and this sort of thing, because Russia is going to end up running out of stuff, just like Ukraine is running out of stuff. The difference is Russia's got a larger economy, larger industrial base, so they can make more and keep up the industrialization and the creation of weapons and ammunition a little bit longer than Ukraine can, given size. But as long as Europe and the United States and other countries are willing to supply Ukraine with arms, that really shouldn't be much of an issue. Yes, it prolongs the war. If your only concern about the invasion of Ukraine is the ending of the war because you're that much anti-war, then yeah, I just don't agree with you. I don't care. The issue isn't just the fact that a war is going on, it's the fact that an illegal war, well, most wars are illegal, but this is a war of aggression designed to take territory with a nascent democracy, is just bad for the rest of the world. So anything that can be done to ensure or help bring a victory condition to Ukraine, where Russia is not necessarily a complete loser, but doesn't actually meet its objectives, is a good thing for the world. And I'm just going to disagree with you if you just want to see Ukraine basically run out of arms and then have to surrender. That's just not what we're doing here. But with that, everybody, that concludes this segment on Ukraine. Now, if you're just joining us, this is the news roundup. We do this typically 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, covering the news that was the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. We have other projects that we work on as well. First up, we do a lot of debates. We're going to be doing those more. If you reach out to me, again, the best way to do so right now, as of right now, is to hit us up on Discord. If you reach out to me on Discord and you give me at least a week's notice, I can pretty much make any day work. Pretty much. There's going to be some things like next week. I'm not free next weekend. I have prior engagements. But if you give me a week's notice, I can pretty much make almost every weekday work, especially Thursdays, because I can move the newscast around, stream a little longer, what have you. But yeah, hit us up on there if you want me on your debate panel. It's the easiest way to get a hold of me. We also do Cypher State, which is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast, and that should be starting back up at the end of the month. Have to reach out to some people, get it going, get it started, but it should still happen at the end of the month. And we also do long video essays and podcast episodes, which you can find on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast streaming service. But let's continue on now. We have to continue on. Now we're going to move on to congressional politics. And starting off with the House and it targeting funding for the NDAA. Let's get into it. So GOP Representative Matt Gaetz, who isn't shy about his anti-Ukraine views, thinks NATO could be better off with Russia instead of Ukraine as a member country. Why would you pick Ukraine? Why not extend NATO to Russia and make it an anti-China alliance? The Florida Republican told Newsmax on Tuesday. Continuing on, he stated, quote, "Are we really thinking that we're more afraid of the broken down tanks from Russia than the fact that China is building a secret military base on the island of Cuba, 90 miles away from the United States?" Gaetz added. Gaetz and other lawmakers in the GOP's right flank are pushing for amendments to the annual National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the NDAA, that would tank funding for Ukraine. Based on reporting from Business Insider and Reuters, the lawmakers have sought to add various poison pills to prevent the NDAA from making it through the House vote. Leading the charge is the so-called House Freedom Caucus, whose members have long opposed U.S. support for Ukraine's defense. More than 20 House Republicans, hardliners mind you, warned Speaker McCarthy this week that they will move to block their party's fiscal 2024 appropriations bills. They say a block will occur unless spending levels are cut to numbers even lower than what McCarthy and President Biden agreed to in May. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was in the Freedom Caucus until recently, proposed an amendment cutting some $300 million in new funding for Ukraine. That amendment was just one of 6 Green proposed, with the other 5 focusing on banning Pentagon funding for gender transition services and cutting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, among other things. The threat comes in the face of a looming showdown between the Republican-controlled House and a Democratic-led Senate. Quote, we expect all appropriations measures to be in line with the enacted fiscal year 2022 top line level of 471 trillion. Let's just restate that because I got all tongue-tied. It's one of those days. Quote, absent adhering to the 1.471 trillion spending level, we see an impossible path to reach the 218 Republican votes on appropriations over measure. Jesus fuck. I need water. Okay, let's start that over. Quote, absent adhering to the 1.4 trillion spending level, we see an impossible path to reach 218 Republican votes on appropriations on other measures, the letter said. The group includes lawmakers who shut the House floor down last month to protest McCarthy's deal with Biden that averted default on U.S. debt. A host of hot-button issues ranging from abortion to transgender rights are expected to be pulled into upcoming debates, further complicating matters. If lawmakers fail to agree on a budget before the next fiscal year begins in October, the U.S. could see its fourth partial government shutdown in a decade. Now, this is very important. We have to pontificate about this a little bit because there's issues here. So first up, the Republicans don't see any kind of loss with a partial government shutdown. The reason it's a partial government shutdown is because there are various government apparatuses that need to continue to function by law due to their special nature. For example, the military, the FBI, some Social Security Administration people, the IRS, not the IRS necessarily, but and among others. And since those keep working, there isn't much harm necessarily done to the general public with a government shutdown, at least not right away. Okay. The reason we say not right away is because of the fact that a government shutdown takes money out of the economy. Because while the government is shut down, all government employees are mostly not paid unless there's some sort of appropriations made, exemptions for them so they can still get paid. For example, during the last government shutdown, the military was still paid. The military still got its checks on time because they passed a continuing resolution strictly for U.S. military. They did the same thing for the Social Security Administration. They did the same thing for Medicaid and Medicare spending. So those things that would have impacted a lot of people were exempt from the government shutdown. The checks were still delivered, and they were mostly done on an automated basis. In previous government shutdowns, the military was not paid on time, but banks and the like stepped up and be like, hey, we know we're going to get our money from y'all. You're guaranteed this money, so here's your money anyways from us. It's a no interest loan. The government will give us some extra money, whatever. So don't worry about it. So it didn't hurt many people. And really, the only people the Republicans care about in the government to an extent at this point is military members. They don't want to have the military members starving or what have you. And so if long as those people are paid, the Republicans don't see this as a loss at all, even though it hurts the economy overall. But it's just not right away. It's very ephemeral. It's very like in the background, very much future oriented in that. So they don't really care. And the American people seem to have gotten used to this brinksmanship, and they say, well, eventually the government will get funded, so it's not really a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And so nobody really gives a shit. I know people don't seem to really care. The Republicans consider themselves to benefit when the government doesn't spend money, even if they eventually respend it anyways, and they have to give back pay and with a little bit of interest or what have you. They don't care. And so there's no incentive for them, really, to fund the government unless it's their Republican president in charge, because then it looks bad on him to an extent for the government to be shut down. And that's just where we're at. So would not be surprised if come October 1st that the Republicans, these 20 members or so, maybe 30, maybe there'll be some extras, don't let an appropriation bill go forward and therefore leads to a government shutdown. This is why the government was funded. Not the government. This is why the debt ceiling was suspended until 2024. Because they knew this shenanigans would continue on for the foreseeable future. So they got a deal in place that would just take that off the table until after the 2024 election, which is good for everybody, except maybe the Freedom Caucus people. But it's good, politically speaking, for both Republicans and Democrats to not have to worry about that until after the 2024 election. So that's why everything happened the way it did. Should be pretty obvious, but I think it's really good to emphasize that point. So with that, everybody, though, that concludes this segment of the Roundup. Let's now move on to the Senate and talk about a bill to prevent President from withdrawing from NATO. Interesting. What is this about? Well, let's get into it. So Reuters reported that Democratic and Republican senators have renewed an effort to block any U.S. president from leaving NATO. The joint resolution is a fresh effort by Congress to prevent the president from withdrawing from the alliance without the Senate's approval. Quote, the president shall not suspend, terminate, denounce, or withdraw the United States from the North Atlantic Treaty, done at Washington, D.C., April 4th of 1949, except by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. Provided that the 2/3 of the senators present concur or pursuant to an act of Congress, the measure says. The bill has been introduced repeatedly in recent years, including during the term of former President Donald Trump, who voiced a desire for the United States to leave the military alliance. It is yet to pass the full Senate, but an aide to Tim Kaine noted that it was backed by the Foreign Relations Committee last year with strong bipartisan support. The aide also stated that given the war in Ukraine and the expansion of NATO, backers expect stronger support than ever. Makes sense. There's an active war going on in Europe that is causing a lot of concern about the security of Europe and therefore security of the United States. There is growing tensions with China, hence why Matt Gaetz wants to bring in Russia for some reason. I mean, that's just stupid. Russia's not going to abandon China. The whole China-Russia buddy thing here is really, really just a way for autocratic governments to band together against sanctions done by democratic governments against autocratic regimes to pressure them into doing things that we want. So that's why they have that. There's no way Russia's going to join NATO. It's not going to join an anti-China alliance. That's not what's going to happen. Because value-wise, they're not similar enough. It's asinine. Ugh, sorry, my nose itches. So that was asinine, honestly. But the fact that this is continuing and there's these threats coming and there's this everything that's going on makes sense that the Senate has more support now than it did a year, maybe even a year ago. That's what we have. But that concludes that segment. The Roundup. We're going to continue on with information from the Senate, and this time talking about the FCC nominee is approved by Senate committee. Per Reuters, the Senate Commerce Committee voted yesterday to approve Biden's nominee for a key fifth seat on the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. Democrats have been stymied since 2021 from gaining a majority on the telecommunications regulator. The committee voted to approve Ana Gomez, a Democratic telecommunications attorney who currently serves as a senior advisor for the State Department's Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Privacy. It also approved new terms for current commissioners Republican Brenda Carr and Democratic Joffrey Starks. Since January of 2021, the FCC has been deadlocked 2-2. The deadlock has stalled Democrats' efforts to reinstate landmark net neutrality rules that were revoked under Republican President Donald Trump. The open internet laws seek to bar service providers from blocking or slowing traffic or offering paid internet fast lanes. In other words, You see this throttling of bandwidth based on various different things, and if the notion goes that the internet should be open to the public, even if it's not going to be free and treated as a public utility, at least that nobody will be able to pay to have priority in their traffic. So not being able, for example, when AT&T owned Warner Brothers, then it wouldn't necessarily want to get Warner Brothers to, which included HBO, to throttle Netflix because it's at competition with Warner Brothers. Or, maybe a Republican leaning owner of a major telecommunications network could throttle or prevent access to Democratic ads online and websites and that sort of thing. All this was done. Net neutrality is intended to prevent any of that stuff from happening, which is something that I think everybody should agree with. Free market Republicans claim that this would remove choice from the consumers by being able to not pay for faster internet access. That's not how this works. I pay for GigaFiber. I get synchronous fiber. I pay for that, and I get around 800 megabits per second, both up and down on my internet. It can get to 1 gig. It's supposed to be 1 gig, but on average, it's about 800 MPS. So that's already a thing. We can already pay for faster internet. People still use dial-up. Yeah, they still use their phone line and use dial-up to get to the internet. So I don't see this being a thing that's negative for consumers. It's actually consumer protection that net neutrality has followed. Continuing on, though, Senate Commerce Committee Chair Maria Cantwell said that the nominees could go to the Senate floor for a vote before the August recess. In July of 2021, Biden signed an executive order encouraging the FCC to reinstate net neutrality rules adopted under Democratic President Barack Obama in 2015. And as we previously said, this is a good thing. But that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Continuing on, though, let's make sure we're not missing anything here. No comments from the chat yet. All right. Got about 6, 7, 8 people watching, so let's go. Let's continue on. This one is fun. This one is fun. We're going to talk now about the FTC opening an investigation into OpenAI. So the Federal Trade Commission has opened an investigation into OpenAI on claims it has run afoul of consumer protection laws by putting personal reputations. Let's just start that segment over. The Federal Trade Commission has opened an investigation into OpenAI on claims it has run afoul of consumer protection laws by putting personal reputations and data at risk. This is the strongest regulatory threat to the Microsoft-backed startup thus far. The FTC this week sent a 20-page demand for records about how OpenAI, the maker of generative artificial intelligence bot ChatGPT, addresses risk tied to its AI models. The agency is probing if OpenAI engaged in unfair practices that resulted in reputational harm to consumers. The investigation marks another high-profile effort to rein in technology companies by the FTC's progressive chair, Lena Khan. It comes days after the agency suffered a big loss in courts in its fight to stop Microsoft from buying Activision Blizzard. The FTC has said that it will appeal that decision. According to the FTC's demand for information set to OpenAI, one of the questions has to do with steps OpenAI has taken to address its product's potential to, quote, generate statements about real individuals that are false, misleading, or disparaging. This is actually really important. During our investigations into OpenAI, not just OpenAI, but artificial intelligence in general, using it as a consumer, generating it as myself as a data specialist, the data scientist, I have come across a myriad of false things that OpenAI says that people have done. You can create entire long-length episodes by Planet Money or Tom Brokaw and have them say all manner of stuff that's just not true. And if it gets put onto the web, it can be defamation. That's one thing. Is it defamation from OpenAI or from the people that use it to generate this information? Here's another thing. OpenAI generally can and does create false quotes and attributions. There's an example that Planet Money found when investigating how OpenAI worked and how ChatGPT worked and how large language models work. All this stuff, where they had told ChatGPT to write a paper about how communications in the 1950s changed when automatic switchboard operators for telephones came into prominence. And they've generated a quote by a woman that did a lot of research into it, but the quote was fake. And this isn't just ChatGPT. This is all generative AI models when using real people. People are making cool little, like, there's a Twitch channel. Actually, let's pull that up. It's a 24-hour debate. Twitch TV. We're going to pull it up because this is fun. So, Debate Forever, I think it's what it's called. What is it called? Debate Forever. This is it. No, that's not it. Hold on. Debate Forever, Twitch, Biden versus Trump. Deranged Endless Live Stream. No, that's just the image. Hold on. We're gonna pull it up here because this is important. I think this is fun. It's live right now. So here it is. Trump Biden 2024. We're gonna pull this up. All right. Oh, there's somebody talking about it? Oh, well, let's go ahead and just go over. I thought we were going to watch something, but he's doing this right now.
Include voice processing, $22. Amazon Web Services. Any surplus goes to improving our AI setup. Together, let's keep the laughs coming. Oh, and we use a voice processing service called play.htt. Thanks again.
So this guy's fake too.
Look at this asshole Athene. He's out here begging for donations like a pathetic little scammer. Well, let me tell you something, folks. This guy ain't. He's nothing but a loser. And anyone who actually gives this fuckcock money is an even bigger loser. I mean, seriously, who falls for this shit? It's like throwing your hard-earned cash into a giant toilet and flushing it away. But let me make one thing crystal fucking clear. All right? If you're dumb enough to donate to this cult-leading douchebag, you're going to get what you deserve. And what you deserve is a kick in the nuts. Yeah, that's right. You're going to get metaphorically kicked in the nuts by me.
All right. So I think that basically exposes what we're talking about here. Now, picture this going off and then Biden saying we're going to drop nukes on China tomorrow, and like it looks real and it hijacks live broadcast feeds and everything like that. Like, this is a problem. And these are the kind of things that we are going to talk about when we do our long video essay on AI, what it means, where it's going, and the like. We'll tell you all across all of social media when that video is ready, but it is going to take a different look at what AI does, what generative AI does, where we're at, how people are going to react to it, and stuff like that in a slightly different way than most people are looking at. So stay tuned to that. So, but let's continue on with the newscast. Okay. So in kind of a follow-up story to a thing that we've been looking at, we're talking about the LIV Golf merging with the PGA Tour. We have additional information coming out of the Senate, and specifically in regards to U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal, who tore into a repressive Saudi regime on Tuesday during a Senate hearing on the PGA Tour's framework agreement with the country's Public Investment Fund, of the PIF. Many lawmakers see the agreement as an attempt by Saudi Arabia's government to buy influence in U.S. sports. The PIF governor will be the chairman of the new entity called NewCo. In the framework, while PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Morahan will serve as its CEO. Quote, "Today's hearing is about much more than a game of golf," said Blumenthal. Continuing on, he stated, quote, "It is about how a brutal, repressive regime can buy influence, indeed, even take over a cherished American institution simply to cleanse its public image. A regime that has killed journalists, jailed and tortured dissidents, fostered a war in Yemen, and supported other terrorist activities," added Blumenthal, who spoke of a feeling of betrayal from the PGA. The Justice Department, which has been investigating the PGA Tour for trying to keep its players from defecting to LIV, could out to sue to block the deal as well. It could also be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States, or CFIUS, a Treasury-led committee that assesses mergers and to determine whether they harm national security. I think that this is a very interesting story because it just shows how much people care about golf if they're rich. I don't give a shit about golf. I don't know anybody that cares about golf. Obviously, golf is a popular sport. People still watch it. There's tours that happen all the time. People are there buying tickets, and it's like it makes money. It's not like a money loss. It's not just a rich people's playground kind of thing with golf. But like the fact that this is considered a cherished American institution is just mind blowing to me because it's fucking golf. But continuing on, critics have accused LIV Golf of being a vehicle for Saudi Arabia to improve its reputation, or sports watching, as it faces criticism of its human rights record. The record includes the 2018 murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, as well as its record on women's rights and gay rights. This whole sports watching thing here might have a little bit of truth, but I don't necessarily think that it's per se Saudi Arabia trying to brush up on its image necessarily, as much as it is just trying to flex its wealth muscles and get in on some ability to have power and influence. I don't think they actually think that this is going to help its reputation. I think they're going to use this as a vehicle to win friends and influence people. Continuing on though, the PGA's tour's shocking agreement with the PIF has raised concern from lawmakers who are mistrustful of the kingdom and critical of its human rights record. They have vowed to take a deep look into the deal. Quote, "The PGA Tour is not that big in terms of players. If LIV takes 5 players a year, in 5 years, they can gut us," board member Jimmy Dunn said, while detailing the threat LIV Golf would have been to the tour if a deal had not been reached. We need to talk about that bit a little bit. I think that's something that people aren't necessarily aware of. So LIV being part of the Saudi, basically the Saudi Arabian Wealth Fund, the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, that's what I'm looking for. Being part of the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund was created in order to build up like basically a golf tour for the Saudi government and the Saudi royals and everything else, right? As a means of not I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's sports watching. I think this is more buying friends and influencing people sort of thing. And what they were doing, they were just coming way over the top on PGA Tour members, people like the sports stars, the players, and just being like, boom, money bomb, boom, money bomb, boom, money bomb. Just offering like 4 to 5 times the amount that they were being paid by the PGA per game or per tournament or what have you. And they're just like, sign with us and you'll get like $5 billion. Like it was ridiculous. I'm exaggerating for a little bit of effect, but it was ridiculous. And if they didn't make a deal at all, then it's possible that this person is right. That shit, whatever. I lost the name. Jimmy Dunn. It's possible that Jimmy Dunn is correct, that they would have just bought all the players. I don't necessarily know that it'd be such a big loss, unless they like prevented the players from playing in the United States with that, or on previously signed PGA Tour rights golf courses or something of that nature. Maybe that would have been bad, generally speaking, for golf overall. But they probably are also trying to just get a little bit of the cut of the Saudi money. Obviously, Saudi was willing to pay this much money, so I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely something to this. Continuing on, though. Pressed on the matter of Saudi financial involvement, PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer Ron Price said, quote, "There's been the discussion. It would be a significant amount, north of $1 billion. That is huge." So they're trying to buy out golf for some reason. Maybe MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is just like a big golf head and he just wants to own golf. Like, it could be that simple, honestly, but there's definitely something going on here. And that $1 billion transaction, that is a lot of money. It's a lot of CEO getting some bonuses and executives getting bonuses. It could amount to a bribe, to be honest with you, just because of how much they're offering. Like, PGA, do you think the PGA doing this kind of like half-assed merger is worth $1 billion? When they're going to be generating revenue that they get to keep? I don't think so. I really don't. For his part, though, Blumenthal told Pierce and Dunn they still have a chance to stand up against sports washing, against the Saudi monarch, and to stand up for America. The Senate committee also released a 276-page memo that included new correspondence on how the framework deal between the PGA Tour and Saudi-funded LIV Golf came together. In the memo, it was revealed that the PGA Tour requested a side agreement with the PIF that LIV Golf CEO Greg Norman would be fired upon completion of a final agreement. Norman is a former world #1 golfer who has been the public face of the breakaway circuit. It also revealed a proposal for both Tiger Woods and Roy McIlroy. Looks, how do you pronounce that? McIlroy? Oh, okay. Sorry, it's McIlroy. It was hard to read because it, yeah. Anyways, McIlroy. Northern Irish. Anyways, and Roy McIlroy, two of the sport's biggest names to own LIV golf teams and participate in at least 10 events on the breakaway circuit. So again, the fact that they were being bought out, very much possible. Is this sports washing? I don't think it's sports washing necessarily, but it is definitely an influence campaign, at the very least. And as more of this story develops, we will be sure to have information for you on this program and, of course, on the Cipher State program, which is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast. So be sure to check that out wherever you get your podcast. With that, my friends, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. If you have any news you want to see us cover on the Roundup, or if you would like to join one of our panels, debate me, what have you, here is a way to let us know. First up, again, you can join our Discord or hit me up on Discord. We're doing Discord only events. We're going to be doing Discord contests. We redesigned entirely the Discord, cleaned up a lot of channels, opened up a news forum. We're generating feeds so that you can subscribe to news feeds so you don't have to go hunting all over the place for news of a particular type. We're doing a lot of stuff with the Discord. Make it kind of like a one-stop shop for all things politics and fun and news related, crowdsourcing a bit. So again, join the Discord. I highly recommend it. We're doing, like I said, a lot of stuff to make the Discord a very useful tool for you. You can also still, at this time, hit me up at Twitter at crowdsourcedpoll. You can also find me on Threads. Well, I don't know how much longer I'll be using that with Blue Sky invite, but Threads, you can get at me at Crowdsourced Politics. You can also find me on Mastodon at CSP Cipher at Federated Press. You can also find us on Facebook at Crowdsourced Tribune page of Crowdsource Tribune. So again, there's a number of ways to get a hold of us. Discord is the easiest. It's the most robust. So please go ahead and get us up there. But let us continue on with the newscast. I know it sounded like we're ending, but we still have about an hour to go, and we still have a lot of news to cover. Let's get into it. This time with some news from the Biden administration. And specifically, right now, we're going to be talking about the social media injunction appeal. So, according to the Washington Post, the Justice Department asked the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit on Monday to stay a preliminary injunction that puts extraordinary limits on government communications with social media companies. The administration argued that the sweeping order could chill law enforcement activity to protect national security interest. The 22-page request came just hours after the district judge, Terry A. Daughtry, denied the Justice Department's request for a stay. Daughtry imposed the preliminary injunction limiting government communications with social media companies on July 4th. The Justice Department filing signaled that it could seek the intervention of the Supreme Court. At a minimum, the government said, the Fifth Circuit should put the order on pause for 10 days to give the nation's highest court time to consider an application for a stay. In its filing, the Justice Department warned that the injunction could bar a wide swath of communications between the government and the tech industry. It would stop the president, for instance, from denouncing misinformation about a natural disaster circulating online. It also said the order has the potential to disrupt communications about the fentanyl crisis or the security of federal elections. And it warned that the injunction creates legal uncertainty that could lead to disastrous delays in responding to misinformation. Quote, although this preliminary injunction involves numerous agencies, it is not as broad as it appears, Daughtry, a Trump-appointed judge, wrote in his denial of the stay. It only prohibits something the defendants have no legal right to do, contacting social media companies for the purpose of urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing in any manner the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech posted on social media platforms. So, kind of agree with him on that. That's what the injunction does. But, with that said, then there's no way to do anything. Like, the government can't come in and say that this information's wrong, right? Because they can't, like, what? It says, Daughtry supports, it only prohibits this defendant's legal right company contacting social media companies for the purpose of urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing in any manner removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech posted on the social media platform. So, yeah. Then it couldn't be, the government's messages couldn't be boosted either under this, probably. So essentially, it protects all speech, which is what from the government, which is fine, but it makes it so the government can't also be like, hey, social media company, this information here is just false, which could mean that if somebody did the thing with the AI, like I said, there'd be no way to take it down unless they figured it out on their own. And that would be maybe tricky. Pretty scary stuff. I am not saying that Daughtry here, I'm not saying that Daughtry made a wrong ruling, but I think this needs more weight than what he gave to it. We'll just put it that way. Let's continue on, though. But the Justice Department appealed to the Fifth Circuit, said that there's carve-outs cured neither the injunction's overbreadth nor its vagueness. In issuing its injunction, Daughtry said that the Republican state attorneys general who brought the lawsuit are likely to prove that a variety of government agencies and officials, quote, coerced, significantly encouraged, and or jointly participated in suppressing social media posts that included anti-vaccination views and questioned the result of the 2020 election. The State Department last week canceled a meeting about the 2024 election preparations with Facebook's parent company Meta in the wake of Daughtry's injunction. On Monday, state election officials said that they would continue their efforts to address online disinformation despite the injunction, because the injunction only applies to the federal government. And this injunction is not a form of final ruling on whether the government has a legal right to do this, but it stops it from doing it while the court considers whether it does or does not. So this is a very complicated issue, in my opinion. It's very complicated. And I don't see why others can't see that. For me personally, I want the government to basically go and flag information, not flag it like a company database and delete it, but come out and be like, this information is wrong. It's wrong because of XYZ. Very, very transparent about it. If there's a source or methodology for like the CIA or the NSA or something like that, I'm not one to be like, oh, you got to show us how you got that information exactly, right? I'm not one of those people. I'm not somebody that's like wants to see the government not have any sort of apparatus to like monitor stuff or what have you, and have to reveal that in every single way. But it should be able to come out and be like, say these things, right? There's nothing in the injunction that says that I can't. What this injunction does do, though, is it prevents the government from going to social media companies and saying that. And if the social media companies aren't informed, then they can't do anything. But this injunction doesn't really stop the federal government from releasing a public statement and then having Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, or any other manner of social media platform from deleting it after the government came out and said forcefully this. So maybe that's what should happen. I don't know, though. Again, I think this is actually a fairly complicated situation. I am not a free speech absolutist, but I am very close to it. The reason I no longer say I'm a free speech absolutist is because those people consider any sort of moderation done by any social media platform, regardless of the reason, to be a tantamount to censorship from the government, essentially. And I'm not playing that game. Sorry. You're not guaranteed a microphone, buddy. You're guaranteed to not be prevented from talking by the US government. That's it. That's all it does. Other people saying you're full of shit, deleting your stuff, not letting you post on social media, taking all your social media stuff down, even if it's done at such a systemic level that it might as well have been the government, is simply not the government doing it. And while there are probably issues with that, that is just the market doing its thing. Not protected for that. You're not guaranteed a platform. You're not guaranteed a microphone. You're simply protected from the government preventing you from speaking. That's it. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the news roundup. Oh, I got tennis elbow or something. Fucking hurts. Check in the messages. Check in the messages. Duke. Oh, I got invited to another debate, possibly. Friends. Was that Duke? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Just gotta make sure I'm not missing any messages on Discord either. So. Alright. Alright. But we gotta continue on. And now we're moving on to more information coming out of the Biden administration. This time we're talking some environmental stuff. And specifically, funds to plug orphaned gas wells, oil wells. So the Interior Department announced on Monday more than $650 million in bipartisan infrastructure law funding that will be used to plug abandoned oil and gas wells, according to reporting from The Hill. Orphaned wells are associated with major safety and health hazards, and many of them are associated with methane leaks. The Environmental Defense Fund estimated about 14 million Americans live within a mile of an orphaned well. Separate research indicates such infrastructure particularly affects communities of color. These communities host a disproportionate amount of urban gas and oil wells because of the practice of redlining. Kansas has already received $25 million in initial funding to plug its abandoned wells, and is eligible for another $25 million of the new funding. The bipartisan law includes a total of $4.7 billion for orphan wells management, including $2 billion in grants derived from the $660 million. What? Okay. I think that's supposed to be $660 million from $2 million, whatever. The administration previously announced $560 million in grants to plug orphan wells in August of 2022, with eligible states plugging nearly 3,000 wells so far using the funding. And the money is only going to keep coming and coming and coming into 2024. So good times are ahead, like we said last week. But that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Oy. All right. Yeah, I'm tired today. Getting through this pretty quick. Am I talking really fast? I feel like I might be talking really fast. All right. Shake it off. All right. Let's move on now to SCOTUS. And first, we're going to continue on a story that we've been reporting on off and on for the last month. And that, of course, I am talking about ethical concerns surrounding the Supreme Court. Some of the U.S. Supreme Court's conservative judges are mired in ethical controversies, promoting members of Congress to call for not only testimony from Chief Justice John Roberts, but also for formal accountability. According to The Guardian, Senate Democrats this week have called for a vote on the bill to establish a code of conduct for the Supreme Court justices. The code of conduct would be similar to those that other government agencies must follow. The bill would demand the court create a code within 180 days and establish rules on recusals related to potential conflicts of interest and disclosure of gifts and travel. The legislation, however, is unlikely to pass in a divided Congress, especially since all this information is coming out about their good boys on the court. Meanwhile, the ethical concerns involving justices have continued to mount. As the new rounds, Meanwhile, the ethical concerns involving court justices have continued to mount. As the Roundup has previously reported, Clarence Thomas' friend Harlan Crow, the Texas Republican billionaire mega donor, bought 3 properties that a conservative justice and his family owned. The purchases included Thomas's childhood home in Savannah, Georgia, where Thomas' mother still lives rent-free. Crow had made significant renovations, cleared blight, and let Thomas' mother live there rent-free. The cost was more than $100,000, but was not disclosed. Crow has said that the purchase was made to eventually turn the home into a museum for Thomas. So this reason that this one is important, $100,000 might not seem like a lot of money. Living rent-free might not seem like a lot of money. Okay? Over the course of 10 years, we'll just say, okay, rent-free. We're just going to do this. So we'll say 10 years rent-free, roughly $1,500 a year, $1,500 a month. So 1,500 times 12 times 10 is another $180,000. So all told, $280,000 in total spending thus far, just to benefit his mom, Thomas's mom. Minor graft, probably. Not something that anybody would necessarily be too concerned with, but it's still an ethical lapse of judgment. But that is not the only thing that this is about. Justices and a lot of people in government that are high on their own supply are very much concerned about their legacy. The fact that this home will be turned into a museum to forever honor, as long as the museum's trust has money to honor Clarence Thomas, allows that legacy to continue no matter what he does, no matter if his bloodline dies or what have you. As long as that trust has money in it, the museum will be there to put forward Thomas's legacy and his history and his rulings and sing his praises. This is why that is a mountable concern. This is why these things should not be allowed. This might be why the justices should get paid a little bit more money. But I don't think this is necessarily a money issue. I don't think you can stop the bribes from happening here without oversight. And that's why we need oversight in the court. It's not just a partisan thing. Stephen Breyer had issues before retiring as well. He was the second most traveled justice on the Supreme Court, second only to Clarence Thomas. Had a lot of speaking fees. Might have ruled in some opinions where he gave talks to people that were having cases before him. Maybe it influenced his decision. These things should not be allowed. And they are only made worse by the fact that justices are forever on the court. If you're only on the court for like 10 years, your legacy about your court is not as much of a concern. But if you're there forever, everything counts. You are a god among men, right? You are an unelected member of 9, the elite of the elite of the elite, creating laws for the nation, regardless of what people want. They create laws. That's how common law works. And so these are powerful individuals, easily corrupted, and no accountability whatsoever. No way to really hold them to any sort of standard that could make them impeached, and in an objective way, right? So that's why we're pushing for these things. That's why I think the court needs reform. I've been saying this for 20 years. 20 years. That would have made me, my friends, I was saying this when I was 16, 17 years old. That's how long this has been a problem. Okay? So it's not a partisan thing. I want to see the court fixed. Now, it's not, like I said, it's not just Thomas, though. Justice Neil Gorsuch sold a 40-acre property he co-owned in rural Colorado after he became a justice, Politico reported. Brian Duffy, the chief executive of Greenberg Thurrig, which has had more than 20 cases before the court, bought the property in 2017. Gorsuch disclosed that sale and reportedly made between $250,000 and $500,000 before he left blank the buyer's identity. He left the buyer's identity blank. So obviously he knew this was an issue. Oh, I just forgot to fill the form out. No, eat my ass. Don't play that. That's stupid. More information, though. Crow paid thousands of dollars in private school tuition for 2 boarding schools that Thomas's great-nephew attended, according to ProPublica. The transaction was not disclosed as well. An investigation by the Associated Press revealed how colleges. Let's start that over. An investigation by the Associated Press revealed how colleges and universities attract Supreme Court justices to campuses as a way to generate donations for the institution. This raises ethical concerns around a court that, unlike other government agencies, does not have a formal code of conduct. The visits have resulted in all expense paid teaching opportunities and book sales. Government aides from other branches such as Congress and the presidency are barred from using government resources for personal gain. The Republican activist Leonard Leo paid Thomas's wife, Ginny, $25,000 for polling services in January of 2012, telling the Republican pollster Kellyanne Conway to make no mention of Ginny, the Washington Post has reported. The Judicial Education Project, a law firm tied to Leo, filed a brief to the Supreme Court in the landmark case that eventually gutted Voting Rights Act, not long after the payment was made. There's smoke, brother. There's fire. Just saying, man. These are things that give, even if everything was on the up and up, right? Even if there was no influence from this whatsoever, the appearance of influence is sometimes worse than the fact of actual negative or actual biased influence, rather. The appearance of influence can sometimes be worse than the out and out bribery because it breaks down trust in the institution and gives people a way to argue about it, thus creating more political divisions. These are prime concerns that every single person in the United States that is a political head at all, left, right, center, leftist, right wing, I guess not Nazis because they're fucking insane, you know, every single person should be concerned with. Every single one. And yet, here we are. But God forbid if the liberal justices suddenly took the court 7-2. God forbid that. If that were to happen, oh no, they would be up in arms saying, recuse, recuse, recuse. Just like liberals are right now. It's gotta stop. The court does not need this much power. It should not have this much influence. Maybe we should not get rid of the Supreme Court. I'm not saying that. But clearly, there needs to be some sort of reform around this issue. At least a code of conduct. Maybe not having lifelong appointments would also be another way to deaden the amount of power that each individual justice has, and therefore make it less likely for people to try to bribe them. Because if they're only there for 10 years, maybe their ruling won't stick around as long. Maybe you'll get overturned. Maybe you'll get fucked later. I don't know. That might just be me. And we talked about Gorsuch. We've talked about Thomas. Let's talk about Roberts. So for Roberts' part, his wife, Jane Sullivan Roberts, ran a legal recruiting firm that raised ethical concerns since she made millions of dollars in commissions from placing lawyers at firms, some of which have appeared before the court. Just keeps getting worse, bro. Just keeps getting worse. The New York Times, for their part, obtained a letter from a former colleague of Roberts to the U.S. Justice Department and Congress inquiring about the connection. For more than 2 decades, Thomas accepted millions of dollars worth of luxury trips on private planes and super yachts and vacations from his friend Crow without reporting any of them on his financial disclosure form. The bare minimum of what justices to the Supreme Court have to do. The bare minimum. Couldn't even do that. Well, I thought that I did not need to disclose my trips to with a friend. It's bullshit. They're lying to you. But Crow, for his part, has said that he did not attempt to influence Thomas politically or legally, nor did he discuss pending Supreme Court cases on said trip. Again, doesn't matter. The appearance of impropriety is a lot, especially with an unaccountable slate of judges. Because at least if there's evidence of impropriety with a president or a member of Congress, we can vote the fucking bastards out. But with a justice, they're there for life, especially with how politically divided the country is. Not going to be able to get an impeachment on them unless they murder somebody or something. Thomas has claimed that he was told he was not required to disclose said trips, again, because they were with a friend. Notably, a company linked to Crow was involved in at least one case before the Supreme Court, Bloomberg has reported. Thomas did not recuse himself on that case. Conservative justices tend to not do that, it seems. We've had examples of Sotomayor recusing, of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson recusing, of Elena Kagan recusing, but not any of the Supreme Court judges, not any of the conservative ones that I can think of in the recent history. And now we have Samuel Alito. Reportedly took a private jet to an all-expenses-covered fishing trip to Alaska, paid for by a hedge fund billionaire and conservative mega donor Paul Singer. NPR reports that Singer has been involved in 10 appeals to the Supreme Court. In an unprecedented move for his part, too, Alito defended himself in an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal, declaring he did not have to recuse himself and followed what he understood to be a standard practice. Yeah, a standard practice by 9 other judges that don't fucking feel like they're accountable to anybody. It's almost like the court needs reform. This brings us now to the no recusal rules. So an array of high-rolling lawyers with cases before the Supreme Court paid money to one of Justice Clarence Thomas' top aides through Venmo as well. The Guardian reports that these lawyers have done everything from successfully arguing against affirmative action to leading the charge to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to carry out its mandated duties. These top lawyers appeared to be paying for the exclusive access to a Christmas party hosted by the justice, according to the payment description on Venmo. One former aide received 7 payments in November and December of 2019. Each Venmo payment was listed with the description of CT Christmas Party or Thomas Christmas Party. One of the lawyers paying the Thomas aide was Patrick Strawbridge, a partner at Consway McCarthy, who successfully helped overturn affirmative action this past week. Another was Kate Todd, former White House deputy counsel under former President Donald Trump. Yet another party-going lawyer was Elbert Lynn, West Virginia's former Solicitor General, who was very influential in Supreme Court case that limited the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So again, I don't know what to tell you. If you do not think that the Supreme Court needs reforms, that it can just be all norms and everything is going to be okay, there doesn't have to be any accountability on the court whatsoever, except what the justices themselves decide to do, you and I do not see eye to eye politically on much of anything. I am not saying this from a partisan perspective. Stephen Breyer can go fuck himself as well. And if we have evidence of Elena Kagan, Soto Sotomayor, of fucking Ketanji Brown Jackson taking these kind of trips and everything like that, they can all fly a kite. None of this should be legal. None of it. Makes you wonder why the Supreme Court ruled that almost outright bribery through political action committees is legal in the first place. Makes you think. But we have more that we need to continue with the Supreme Court, because this was a pretty productive Supreme Court session this past couple of weeks. So let's get into it. So the overturning of affirmative action has led to legacy backlash. We all knew this was going to happen. We have to talk about it anyways because it's an important story. So let's get into it. A civil rights group is challenging legacy admissions at Harvard University in the wake of overturning of affirmative action. The group says the practice discriminates against students of color by giving an unfair boost to mostly white children of alumni. It's the latest effort in a growing push against legacy admissions, the practice of giving admission priority to children of alumni. Backlash against the practice has been building in the wake of the Supreme Court's ruling. Lawyers for Civil Rights, a nonprofit based in Boston, filed the suit on behalf of Black and Latino community groups in New England, alleging that Harvard's admission system violates the Civil Rights Act. Quote, "Why are we rewarding children for privileges and advantages occurred by prior generations?" said Evan Espinoza Madrigal, the group's executive director. "Your family's last name and the size of your bank account are not a measure of merit and should not have any bearing on the college admissions process." Opponents say the practice is no longer defensible without affirmative action providing a counterbalance. I would say it was not defensible whatsoever. The court's ruling says colleges must ignore the race of an applicant, activists point out, but schools can still get a boost to the children of alumni and donors. A separate campaign is urging the alumni of 30 prestigious colleges to withhold donations until their schools end legacy admissions. That initiative, led by Ed Mobilizer, also targets Harvard and other Ivy League schools. President Biden, for his part, suggested last week that the university should rethink the practice, saying legacy admissions expand privilege instead of opportunity. Several Democrats in Congress demanded an end to the policy in light of the court's decision, along with Republicans, including Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. The new lawsuit draws on Harvard data that 70% of Harvard's donor-related and legacy applicants are white. And being a legacy student makes an applicant roughly 6 times more likely to be admitted. It draws attention to other colleges that have abandoned the practice amid questions about its fairness, including Amherst College and Johns Hopkins University. The suit alleges that Harvard's legacy preferences has nothing to do with merit and takes away slots from qualified students of color. It asks the U.S. Department of Education to declare the practice illegal and force Harvard to abandon it as long as the university receives federal funding. An Associated Press survey of the nation's most selective colleges found last year that legacy students in the freshman class ranged from 4% to 23%. At 4 schools, Notre Dame, USC, Cornell, and Dartmouth, legacy students outnumbered black students. Supporters of the policy say it builds an alumni community and encourages donations. A 2022 study of an undisclosed college in Northeast found that legacy students were more likely to make donations, but at the cost of diversity. The vast majority were also white. Now, it should be stated here that I am fully on board with ending legacy admissions. That said, legacy admissions, even under the Civil Rights Act, are probably okay in law. The reason why they weren't can't say it was the reason why they weren't targeted, but from a legal perspective, the reason why they couldn't necessarily be overturned by the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court decision rested on the 14th Amendment, which talks about race explicitly. An admissions process that relies on students having a heritage of people that went to their school is not a race explicit determination. It is a race adjacent one. And in a colorblind society, in one where we only look at whether or not something is explicitly race related, like the justices are attempting to do, legacy admissions would be okay. Personally, I think that what we should have is let the private universities do pretty much whatever the fuck they want. And instead, the federal government should stop partnering with private universities by and large, and instead create regional, federal funded, elite universities of their own that admit people based on merit, and merit being clearly defined by a variety of factors that include things that aren't necessarily GPA and test scores. The elite colleges that we're talking about here did holistic admissions. Holistic admissions at the time before affirmative action was removed included some racial components. We can get rid of those and still mostly get a diverse background of things by looking at things that merit can capture if you expand it beyond grades and SAT scores. Grades and SAT scores do not capture merit, at least not well. A naturally gifted student is not necessarily more meritorious than a student that works hard and is beyond average. We have to take some of these things into account. The way I look at it is that there is an ability to kind of measure a person based off of SAT scores and that sort of thing, and have it essentially be a wash after, 2 or 3.2 to 4 GPA points, right? That's not much of a difference. If you're having a 3.2 versus a 3.6, that's not much of a difference. That could be one semester of a bad year difference. That can be explained by any manner of things. Your essay could be like, in my sophomore year of high school, my parents died and I became an orphan. So I bombed my sophomore year of high school, but after I came back, I made straight A's. Is that not merit? I think that's merit. You can have one bad year. Despite the fact that I have only a 3.3 GPA and a 1100 SAT score, I commit a lot of time to helping my community in the wake of natural disasters and taking care of those less fortunate. By volunteering my time to spend at, I don't know, a camp for disabled or differently abled people, and help those with special needs get acclimated to the work environment. And on top of all that, I make money to help support my family because my mom's a single mom and she can't work as much as she used to be able to. So I have to take care of my brothers and sisters. How is that not merit? How does that not overweigh somebody that's like upper middle class, doesn't have to do shit to like stay fucking afloat, and gets slightly higher GPA and SAT scores? Tell me. I want to know. I'm kind of kicking myself in the ass here that I didn't ever apply to Harvard. I might have gotten in, given my background. I don't know what to tell you, man. These are the things that we can assess through various different metrics. Volunteer. Do you work? Do you make a living during the school year? You're still able to maintain a decent GPA while working 15 hours a week? That says a lot about you. Colleges and universities don't give a shit about that right now. Maybe they should. Oh, you did a broadening semester abroad? Maybe that should count for something. Not only did you do a broadening semester abroad, but you paid for it out of pocket by working 2 jobs and during the summer? Maybe that's a hard part of merit. These are things that I think should be captured in holistic admissions. And they're not illegal under Supreme Court. Even overcoming adversity and talking about how race impacts your life isn't against the Supreme Court's decisions on this. Roberts specifically, or not Roberts, it was Gorsuch, right? Gorsuch, I think it was Gorsuch. Yeah, Gorsuch did it. No, in concurrence. So it was, yeah, Roberts. So Roberts said it. So it was Roberts. So even Roberts said that universities and colleges and universities can look at somebody's essay and weigh their like life experience against other people's life experience and make decisions based on that. So we might not see much of a difference here, but we'll see. So these are things that I think that should be considered in merit. And I think people that want to be just SAT scores and just GPAs are fooling themselves into thinking that is the pinnacle of merit. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the News Roundup. But we still have more to report on. Well, we still have more to report on for the Supreme Court. And now we need to move over to Creative 303's ruling. Terrible for LGBTQ people or not? Based on reporting from them, LGBTQ plus advocates are speaking out against the Supreme Court's ruling in the case of the wedding website designer. This one's going to be a doozy. We're going to get through it and I have a lot to say. The decision saw the court side with a Colorado website designer who sued for the right to refuse services to LGBTQ plus people. The court heard arguments from the case in December, whose plaintiff was a website designer named Lori Smith, who said that her Christian beliefs prevented her from creating websites that celebrated same-sex marriages. A Colorado public accommodation law requires businesses to offer services to all customers or face a fine. Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented, noting that the ruling was the first instance in the history of the court of granting, quote, a business open to the public a constitutional right to refuse to serve members of a protected class. LGBTQ plus advocates have spoken out about the ruling's potential impacts, categorizing it as a dangerous siren call and a foothold for more potential anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination. The case was at least partially predicated on a request the plaintiff said she'd received from a same-sex couple, whom the court filing said reached out to her in 2016 to request that she make a website for a gay couple. However, the presumed couple at the foundation of the case was fictional, an aspect of the case that U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg criticized in an appearance on CNN. Smith's legal team argued that the First Amendment protects an artist's right to choose what to say, and that Smith should not have to create a website that she disagrees with. Okay, those are just the facts of the case, all right? But there's a lot to talk about this case. We're going to talk a little bit about it. This case, and what the justices appear to be doing, is trying to carve out a creative works exemption from civil rights protection. And the basis of that is predicated on religion right now and closely held religious beliefs about gay people. But this can be applied to anybody, about anything with deeply held religious convictions in regards to protected class status. Now, creative works is one of those categories that I think most people can agree should be exempted from civil rights protection. But it has to be narrow. Very narrow. For example, you cannot force a person, and this was an example that they brought up, they being the conservative side brought up, a person cannot be required to write a speech promoting any manner of thing that goes against their conscience. Can't force a Muslim to say eating bacon is good. Can't force a Christian to say Satan is Lord, right? These sort of things. Even though these are conflicts, right? These can be potential conflicts between one protected class and another. You can't force speech on somebody. I think most people can agree with that, right? Even if it buttresses up against protected class status. You can't force a baker to say Jesus is Lord any more than you can force a baker to say that he's not, kind of thing, right? But, and this is the big but, I don't consider these things to be expressive creative works. And the reason why I don't consider the two cases that we have, the bake shop maker and the 303 creative things to be that, is because these are not expressive works. Even if you pour all your heart and soul into making a wedding cake, at the end of the fucking day, it is just a wedding cake. It is not expressive. It is not endorsing it at all. That's one thing. So yes, I think bake the cake, bigot. Okay? That is one option for this. You want to keep maintaining your business and open to the public, you should offer those services to everybody. Now, you can't force the baker to design a particular kind of cake, right? You can't say, okay, I want a wedding cake and you have to put two people in whips and chains on it to celebrate my kink wedding. I didn't say heterosexual, I didn't say gay, just said kink, okay? You can't force that on somebody. You can't force them to write words on it. Or you can't force them to design a specific kind of wedding cake. For example, I can't tell them to put gold flakes on it if they don't want to do gold flakes, that sort of thing. But if it's a basic white wedding cake that has no other creative expression of it whatsoever, that's just a white cake that happens to be for a wedding. And it's custom designed because most businesses that make wedding cakes don't sell 3-tiered cakes off the shelf. So it has to be custom made. That's not expressive. I'm sorry. It's just not. To me. Okay. Same thing with this wedding website. I think that the justices, the plaintiff, and the defendants all were wrong about this being purely expressive speech. This is a service. This is not a speech. Okay? Most of the things that go onto a website are not bespoke. They are literally templates for the most part. Now there can be some custom design elements, okay? Like if the website designer also is a graphic designer and they create customized graphic designs for it using, I don't know, pictures of the couple that they like splice in and make really pretty and change the context and everything like that, then we get up to the creative works, the expressive creative works thing. When it's stuff like that, yes, because that is creating something new. But for the most part, a website is just a website. It is a template. It is a template that they can make and just give to somebody to host it elsewhere. That's it. They literally could be like, if I go to somebody to make a website and I say, I want it to look like this, right? I want these things to be on the website. That is literally just a template. We're just going to open up a thing. We're going to do we're going to say basicweb.com. I don't know. I don't know. Basicweb.com. Well, what's a good website? Trying to think. Well, let's just say Etsy. Okay. We're just going to go to Etsy really quick. We're going to go to Etsy. All right. So we're over at Etsy. All right. We're over at Etsy here. Oh, apparently I want gauntlets. I don't know. All these elements are freaking cut and pastable. Like, they're literally just like, point to this image, grab it, okay? And all that stuff. I don't see that as much expressive. I'm sorry. I just don't. It's a website. It's not a fucking bespoke created thing. Okay? I don't think that is. When we get into speech, when we get into words, when we get into customizations, actual customizations that are actually customized, then we get into it. The Supreme Court rejected the Colorado court's ruling that simply changing the dates and names on a website is incidental. No, those are incidental to the website. Simply saying it's for a wedding doesn't suddenly make it a different kind of website with special protections. To me, it just doesn't. Okay? With all that said, there is a compromise that can be done here. And it's one that has existed since the civil rights has existed. That compromise is not having your business open to the general public. And prior to these rulings, prior to these cases, a lot of Christians that did not want to serve gay people simply changed their business practice from being open to everybody to being referral only. We already have that built into the law. I don't understand why that couldn't just be the law. I don't. And the Supreme Court ruling against this, saying that you don't have to go to a referral only, is going to chip away at civil rights protections based on closely held religious beliefs. And this is targeting, I'm not saying that it's overtly targeting. I'm not that conspirator-minded. I'm saying the logic is the same here. Bob Jones University versus the United States, where I believe it was the Warren Court, pretty sure it's the Warren Court. Warren Court, conservatives always hate it. Wonder why. Where they ruled that the government could take away tax-exempt status for failure to follow civil rights protections. And in this case, it was Bob Jones University receiving federal tax-exempt status for not allowing black people to attend its university. This ruling was instrumental into basically destroying the rationale to segregate schools by getting rid of private schools. Because if they're not going to get tax exempt status, then they have to pay taxes on it and they're going to make less money. And so there's not as much money in it, so may as well just not fund the schools, private schools either. The same logic of a deeply held religious belief, because Bob Jones believed miscreation was evil. The miscreation? Whatever the thing is, was evil. The mixing of black people and white people in the same space, in the same area of like allowing mixed race couples to exist, all that stuff was evil. That was part of their deeply held religious belief, or at least claimed to be deeply held religious belief. They pointed to aspects of the Bible that they claimed is like, this is the God saying, don't mix people. Don't get together. No kumbaya. Segregation is good. And if that was allowed to continue based off of deeply held religious beliefs, I don't know if we would ever have gotten a successful Civil Rights Act. And the court is expanding what expressive is. Some of it rightly, some of it maybe wrongly. So, for example, the court cited in the case of Boy Scouts of America USA versus, I can't remember who the other person was, where the Boy Scouts fired a person for being gay in their private organization. That person sued, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, to be allowed in. And the Supreme Court ruled that no, free association means that we cannot force them to admit you as a member, as a person that works on their staff. And the reason being is that that is a form of expression. They're not entirely wrong there. But if we're going to allow that to be expression, and then we're going to say deeply held religious beliefs trump civil rights law, then where is the protection for civil rights? That wasn't even public accommodation. That was employment. So we're going to say that a private organization, a private held entity, can just fire people because they're gay? Now, again? We're going to allow that again? Are we going to allow it because people are black? Are gay people just somehow different than black people? In this logic? When we know that there were people with deeply held religious beliefs that believed that black people should not mix with white people, and they didn't want to have anything to do with them. The logic is the same. It is the same logic. And you can't just point to, oh, it's different because bleh. Okay? In law, you have to have the same logic. So this is nonsense. And that is why people are worried about slippery slopes here. That is why people are worried about the Supreme Court chipping away at civil rights protections. Rightfully, in my opinion. Because the logic follows. There's no difference in the logic. So, Supreme Court, if you agree that we need expressive works, if you agree that we need an expressive works exemption to civil rights protections, then it needs to be narrowly defined so that it doesn't become a way to ignore all civil rights protections. It needs to be narrowly defined. And the court right now is refusing to define a test to determine whether or not a work is expressive, or whether the thing that you're saying, oh, this is expressive, is incidental to that service. And they're refusing to do that. And that gives me cause of concern. And I think it should give you cause of concern too, and make everybody think about how we are going to protect, rightfully, a person's right to not be forced to say something, because that is 100% a thing that we can't force people to do, expound some belief they don't believe in, etc., under force of law, and civil rights protections on the other side. Affirmative rights protection, protecting people's humanity based on characteristics that they do not control. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the news roundup. Now we have just a brief economic summary that we have to go over for a few things here. and just sneaks Roundup. We'll cover more next week when we have more numbers coming out from Friday, as well as other things that happen. We're doing that every other week, but there's some stuff that we have to cover right now. And this is a big one. So the June inflation report is making the case that the U.S. economy can avoid a recession after all, according to PIMCO's former chief economist, Paul McCulley. McCulley pointed to the Consumer Price Index report on Wednesday, which showed prices slowing to just 3% year over year of increases last month. Federal rate target rate is 2%. It went from 4 to 3. It dropped almost a whole percentage point. That's huge. It's also happening quickly, which can cause problems. This is the lowest inflation reading in over 2 years, and it's well below where prices were in July of 2022 when headline inflation clocked in at 8.5%. The drop of inflation is strengthening the case that the U.S. can avoid a recession after all, despite markets eyeing an immediate downturn for most of the past year. We can go over now to a graph about this to show you just how much this is. This is monthly change in U.S. Consumer Price Index. So June, it shot up 1.5%. There was no change in July. It started to creep up. This is creeping up, and then this is going down, right? So this is change in the prices month over month. When it's below this 0.5%, when it's below that, it means prices are pretty much stabilized for the most part. You want it to be, if you want pure price stability, you want it to be zero. You don't want any change in prices, right? But that's just not likely to happen. So as long as it's below 0.5% month over month, you're in a stability price range. And we have had that consistently since February, where this guy has been predicting it and has been spot on for months after it spiked in June. June and July timeframe. Last year, August. I'm just saying. But that's what we had to cover here. Now, moving on, we have to talk about a thing that is making the rounds across some sectors of social media. There's some misinformation about it. There's some right information about it. There's some stuff that we have to tease out from this. And I want to give it as much clarity and facts that we can about it, as well as to talk about the concerns that I have with what is going on. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, I am talking about the movie called The Sound of Freedom. We're going to talk about the movie A Sound of Freedom. So let's get into it. At the end of The Sound of Freedom, the credits roll and the actor Jim Caviezel At the end of Sound of Freedom, the credits roll and the actor Jim Caviezel addresses the camera directly, his face grim. Quote, "I imagine you're feeling sad or overwhelmed or even fearful," he tells the audience. But living in fear isn't how we solve this problem. The problem, broadly, is child sex trafficking. And the solution, implied by the plot of The Sound of Freedom, is courageous sting operations targeting groomers and traffickers willing to provide children to rich Americans. The movie is loosely based on the story of the activist Tim Ballard, who started an organization called Operation Underground Railroad, which conducts such sting operations. We will move over now to a clip from it, provided from CBS News back in 2014, I believe, to talk about this. I might be wrong about the date there. It's not terribly important, but it is well before any of the QAnon stuff that we will get into later. So let's give this a looky-loo.
Last weekend, police broke up a major sex trafficking ring in Colombia, which has become a destination for tourists looking for sex with boys and girls. The police had help from an American who went undercover to rescue the children, and Elaine Quijano met him.
So one thing that should be noted here is that this should have been known to most people that paid attention to news at all since probably 97, 98 at least. I think I remember watching a Dateline episode that went around. This was before Chris Hansen created To Catch a Predator, that went around and tracked people that went from country to country to partake in this evil, disgusting thing. Rich businessmen make the best clienteles sort of situation. So it should be stated here that this has been a problem for a long time, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a giant conspiracy. Let's let it continue though.
Tim Ballard has one mission: to track down child traffickers. 4 months ago, Colombian authorities asked him to investigate a tip that children were being sold there as sex slaves.
Within a half hour, this individual walks up to me, starts asking me what I'm here for, what I want, and within minutes, he says, well, I've got kids as young as 11 years old.
Ballard, a former Homeland Security agent, now heads up Operation Underground Railroad, a nonprofit group that rescues trafficked kids. After that first meeting,
So it rescues trafficked kids heavily in the rape, whatever department. I don't know what Twitch's thing on that is, but it also is about labor as well.
the Colombians asked him to put together a sting.
No men will be in here, only women.
Operation Underground Railroad spent months planning, renting this house, rigging it with hidden cameras to document the crime, coordinating with Colombian authorities, and negotiating with the traffickers.
How they find these.
So this guy's activism is very commendable. Very commendable. I don't think anybody should think otherwise. I don't think they should think of him as like loony or crazy or conspiratorial. The stuff that he's doing very much helps at least some of the kids that are caught up in this evil act. And it's commendable. I don't want anybody to go after him. I don't even want anybody going after the movie or saying that the movie is just bad and it's anything else like that. This is stuff that is very much things that need to happen, and more people like him are doing this all the time. They're also using AI, or not AI, they're using computer generated images, so to like simulate children actually talking and things like that, voice modulations and things like that, to catch people involved in these kind of things. All that work is commendable. The narrative surrounding some of this stuff now, that is an issue, but we'll get into that later.
The kids, is they lure them in by pretending to have a modeling agency. They target them at 9 or 10 years old. And they were telling us that about by 11, they're ready for sex. They're ready to be sold.
What is that?
Okay. And anybody that has been in the military in the last 13 years or so is very much well aware of what he is talking about here. I'm going to bring it over to myself here for a second. I was in the military. Army from 2011 to 2018, served 7 years. In 2012, I was stationed in South Korea. South Korea has a huge problem with human trafficking. And the way that they lure women, especially from the Philippines, Thailand, other Southeast Asian countries, Burma. So it was Thailand, Burma, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam were the main ones. The way they lure women in is to be like, oh, you are so beautiful. You are so talented. We saw you singing at the karaoke bar and we just love your look. And we're going to, we're a group of people in South Korea that contracts and sets up idol stars. They're looking for the next big thing from overseas. And we want you to join our team. And they have other women on their team that goes and talks to them, makes it look legit, flies them into South Korea to do these jobs, promises them big things, and it turns out it's all bullshit. And what they're actually doing is taking away their passports, telling them that they're in debt now because they're able to work in South Korea, making a lot more money than they were making in those countries that I listed, to send it back home to family, oftentimes to their own children, because that is a problem. A lot of people go overseas to work because their own countries do not have enough labor, or I'm sorry, enough jobs for all the labor that's there. So they go to other countries to do work. And then they're threatened with deportation, they're beaten, they're assaulted by the people there, and then said, if you want to leave, if you want to get out, you have to pay me $4,000. You'll get your passport back. And the way you're going to make your money, because you can't work legally here, is that you're going to have sex with people for money. This was drilled into our heads day one of landing in South Korea. Every single military base had what they called juicy bars in the area. The US military wasn't allowed to just shut these down. Okay? And what these places were selling sex, not directly, but sex services for money. So you would go to the bar and you would pay the bartender, and this isn't necessarily illegal. Okay, so not every woman that would work at these juicy bars was necessarily trafficked, but a lot were. Okay, and the way it worked is that you would go and you would pay like $30 or like some other kind of absurd amount of money for a drink that the woman would drink, and she would give you conversation. Call them host bars across Asia. These things are legal. They're not, and again, they're not necessarily trafficking. You pay for expensive whiskey. You know, you pay $30. You pay $30 for a cup of whiskey. You pay $10 for the woman's drink or whatever, and she talks and converses with you, makes you feel good, and that's it. Like, there's no sex being sold, right? But there can be, and in those situations, they're oftentimes victims of human trafficking. So what Tim Ballard is saying, and what he just said, is 100% true. This happens. So yeah, we're gonna let some more of this play out, though. It's only about 3 minutes, and I don't think I'm violating anything here because I'm talking enough about it. But if we do end up having to take this video down, we'll put it up somewhere else.
Like looking into that kind of person's eyes.
It's horrifying, and this is why. Because I've got a smile in the face of evil. The table where we're going to do the negotiation.
Less than 24 hours after the operatives landed, the suspected traffickers arrived on the island, and the final deal with the undercover team began.
All right. I think that's enough of this. There's about 2 minutes left on this, but it's going to give it a lot of repetition, and I think everybody gets the point. Also, I want to avoid the YouTube copyright infringements here. We're gonna cut it there. Now, the real life Ballard that we just listened to did stage a sting operation in Colombia that led to the arrest of several human traffickers, as it is depicted in the film Sound of Freedom. But parts of the actual story have been questioned by reporting, including at Vice, which found a pattern of exaggerations and misleading claims by the real Ballard. Again, this is one of those situations, personally, we need to talk about it because it's important for the truth of it. But these operators always exaggerate how they worked. It's just the nature of the game. I don't know why it is. Maybe you start buying into your own mythos a little bit of how many people you rescued or how many bad guys you captured, whatever, right? And when you create a nonprofit, you have to sell that story in order to get the nonprofit to continue to get money to also help these victims. So I don't necessarily think that this is taking away from the good work that he's doing, that it's that he's necessarily outright lying about it nefariously, but these exaggerations are important to point out. I don't think they diminish much of the movie's message, not the narrative surrounding the movie. Get into that again, like I said, later, but it's something that we do have to point out. With that, Vice News reported in 2020 that Operation Underground Railroad's rescue claims contained a pattern of image burnishing and mythology building, a series of exaggerations that are, in the aggregate, quite misleading. Operation Underground Railroad was started by Ballard in 2013, with funding help from Glenn Beck and Beck's listeners. Okay, That's okay. The group became known for striking deals with child traffickers in developing countries and staging secretly recorded raids at the appointed time of the handoff. Ballard and his teams claim to have rescued 123 victims, 55 of whom were minors, during a series of coordinated stings in Colombia that unfolded during a single day, that were coordinated with Homeland Security investigations. No one questions the importance of keeping children out of sex slavery, or Ballard's belief in his Christian mission. But plenty of experts have questioned his tactics, particularly Ballard's choice to turn these raids into what are essentially tourism opportunities for rich tech bros and celebrities longing to feel like heroes. This is problematic. It's still doing good work. Gotta raise money to do these somehow. But this is kind of gross, in my opinion. As Foreign Policy reported, high-dollar donors have been able to either join Ballard's mission or watch them from the comforts of their own home. In other words, live on TV, you're watching us get some child pedos out of the way. That's a little gross. That's a little icky. That's ew. That's cringe. Very cringe. Again, though, doing good work in a cringe way is still doing good work, but this can make maybe some problems down the line. Not saying that he's lying about anything here. Exaggerations are not necessarily outright lies. Okay, they're things that are important to need to point out for truth. And the overall message that he's doing and the overall work that he's doing is not necessarily diminished by these things. But it is cringe to make money, to raise money off of. You can watch it live while we pull up these pedos. It's a bit weird. Smaller donors, for their part, can sign up for text message alerts to learn when children are saved. That's not so bad, I think. It's not as bad as watching it happen or like paying to participate in this thing. Because you want to, to me, the small donors one here is the equivalent of, for just 20 cents a month, you can help save a starving child in Ethiopia, and we'll send you their picture so you know exactly which child you helped fed, and they'll write you a letter. Like, it's that level of cringe. Pretty typical for these kind of things. It's a little bad, but grand scheme of things, I'm hoping I'm making sense. I don't know if I'm making sense. Please tell me if I'm not making sense or if I'm being a little bit too, I don't really care about that too much. Let me know in the comments below or on live, or depending on how you're watching it. But yeah, I just don't see this as that of a big deal. It's cringe, but Now, we need to get into the broader politics behind the movie and how messy they are, and the heroic storyline that is anything but straightforward. What's more, experts in anti-trafficking, well, let's restate that. So, let's continue on though. The broader politics behind the movie are charitably messy, and the heroic storyline is anything but straightforward. What's more, experts in anti-trafficking work have been critical of Operation Underground Railroad's operations. The argument is that these dramatic raids and rescues are not actually effective, or sometimes can even be damaging to the long-term goal of ending human trafficking practices. The bigger problem with the movie, when watched through an uncritical lens, is that it is misleading about the nature and root causes of human trafficking itself. Although the real Ballard does not present the issue in measured tones, a blog post on Although the real Ballard does not present the issue in measured tones, a blog post on Operation Underground Railroad website readily admits that, quote, while the type of human trafficking exists, it isn't the majority. Human sex trafficking. They point out that, quote, most trafficking happens through a manipulative grooming process by a person already in the victim's life rather than from some frightening and sudden abduction. The latter kind does not happen, I'm just going to restate all that because I need it for the clean clip. Although the real Ballard does not present the issue in a measured tone, a blog post on Operation Underground Railroad website readily admits that while this type of human trafficking exists, it isn't the majority. They point out that, quote, most trafficking happens through a manipulative grooming process by a person already in the victim's life rather than through some frightening and sudden abduction. The latter kind does happen, but very rarely. In other words, taken isn't that real. It happens, but it's not the majority of it. Now, Vice News reported today that Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad parted ways before the movie premiered. Interesting. I wonder why that happened. Now, statistics on human trafficking are notoriously difficult to pin down, but the often cited claim that 800,000 children go missing in the US each year is an extreme exaggeration. Such claims conflate different kinds of disappearances and confuse I'm sorry, Nikki, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just going to restart because I don't know what you're talking about, Nikki. Statistics on human trafficking are Oh, okay. Whatever. Statistics on human trafficking are notoriously difficult to pin down, but the often circulated claim that 800,000 children go missing in the US each year is an extreme exaggeration. Such claims conflate different types of disappearances and confuse reports with crimes. The reality in America is likely around 115 kidnappings a year. But Sound of Freedom doesn't give audiences that context. It starts with a montage of real footage of child abductions and ends with some pretty alarming stats presented in somber text. Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. The US is one of the top destinations for human traffickers and is one of the top consumers for child sex. There are more humans trapped today in slavery than at any point in human history, including when slavery was legal. Millions of these slaves are children. These numbers do reflect an ugly reality, but they are misleading in the context of the film. The 150 billion refers to profits from all human trafficking, the great majority of which is labor, not sex, and which includes both adults and children. The US is considered one of the top destination points for victims of child trafficking and exploitation per UNICEF, but it's hard to rank nations with any kind of certainty. This is because there are so many factors affecting the gathering of international trafficking data. Similarly, the claims about more humans in slavery than at any point in history is hard to establish and is made more complicated by variations in definitions. Worldwide, there are likely millions of children who exist in slavery, but that slavery can take many horrific forms: forced marriages, armed forces, and forced labor. All kinds of slavery put children at risk of sexual abuse, but the movie portrays the goal of trafficking those millions as explicitly sexual, and it suggests that kids are constantly being shipped between abusers. This does not represent the reality. You might think mass distribution misinformation about child abductions isn't that serious, but we know that overblown fears of this kind of practice led to widespread paranoia and societal scapegoating. I'm going to restate that. You might think that mass distributed misinformation about child abductions isn't that serious, but we know that overblown fears of this kind of practice led to widespread paranoia and societal scapegoating. In the 80s and 90s, Satan panic, they're coming for your kids, etc. The producers of Sound of Freedom may be well-intentioned, but they may also know that their film is feeding into a dangerous and deluded mindset that millions of Americans have come to share. Since 2020, panic about children's sexual corruption has become a political boogeyman wielded by politicians, especially on the right. Rolling Stone called Sound of Freedom a QAnon-tinged thriller, a reference to a sprawling conspiracy theory that says that Donald Trump is fighting an elite cabal of satanic pedophiles. That sort of biting coverage, the headline called it a superhero movie for dads with brainworms, was broadly reflective of the reviews in left-leaning outlets, while right-wing publications took an altogether different line. It, quote, "It's not paranoid or QAnon adjacent to bring much-needed attention to horrors that are all too real," wrote the conservative National Review. And they're not necessarily wrong. We'll get into that more later. The idea that elite cabal of elite cabals of child sex traffickers lurk everywhere is a QAnon idea. But the company behind the film denies it is fueling this conspiracy. Quote, "Anyone who has seen this movie knows it has nothing to do with that conspiracy theory," said Angel Studios president Jordan Harmon. "It's about a man who did something brave." These QAnon references, though, are not entirely spurious. The film's star has talked repeatedly about some of its most bizarre themes. Chavez attended a QAnon-themed conference in 2021 and has appeared on a number of times on Steve Bannon's podcast, recently calling QAnon a good thing. So this is where we're getting to the political narrative surrounding the film. The political narrative surrounding the film is an issue. Again, the film itself, absent this political narrative, is fine. Mostly fine. It has some misrepresentations or some confusing statistics in it. I'm sure the film is fine. Okay. The political narrative, though, is not. It is feeding into division and paranoia that is going to get people hurt. And we don't want that. That is why we're pointing this stuff out. That is why we're talking about this on tonight's program. And having the star of the movie explicitly market it on other people's podcasts, especially Steve Bannon, is a problem. And I think that people need to recognize that. I think if you want this movie to be successful and you think it is a good thing, you should be against the politicization of it. The politicization of this film is a problem, and it's causing to have more division happen. And it's something that we shouldn't abide by. And you shouldn't blast people like me for pointing out that, yes, there is a political narrative that is harmful surrounding the film. Even if you want to say the person that wrote it is good, the person that it's about is good, everything else, the political narrative is important to point out and to call out as bullshit. Continuing on, though, using the language of the movement, he warned that a big storm is coming. Again, explicitly QAnon. Continuing on. While the movie doesn't specifically mention QAnon, Chavez has falsely claimed that Ballard rescues children from adrenochroming, which is a fictitious technique in which QAnon believers think children are tortured in satanic rituals. This guy is out there. It's stupid. The director of Sound of Freedom told website Bounding Into Cosmics last month, quote, "I believe if this movie would come out earlier, I don't think the audience was ready." I wonder why you don't think that. Couldn't be that we had a QAnon conspiracy theory going on for 4 years. Continuing on, he quoted to state, well, quote, "Right now, there is advertisement for this film, but on the wrong side. Every day, these atrocities are happening on the news everywhere. Children trafficked, sexually abused children all over the place." Aaron Albright, an attorney who has worked in the anti-trafficking space for years, told Rolling Stones, quote, "What they're saying is so divorced from reality that it does not sling back to create." Aaron Albright, an attorney who has worked in anti-trafficking space for years, told Rolling Stone, quote, "What they're saying is so divorced from reality that it does sling back to create harm. The narratives perpetuated by the film are dangerous." Quote, "It creates harm when certain policies aren't passed because we think trafficking looks one way and it's actually another. It creates harm when victims don't recognize themselves in these narratives." But wait, there's more. Again, the political narratives here are the problem. The film itself, I'm sure, is fine. I've seen these kind of film elsewhere. I'm probably not going to go see the movie in theaters. I might watch it on streaming. I watch most of my movies on streaming now. Okay? I'm not dissing the film. But the narrative is bad. So we have to continue to talk about it. Now, Sound of Freedom earned $10 million in pre-sale tickets and, on its first day of release, nearly equaled the box office gross of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The numbers are astonishing when considering that Sound of Freedom played in 2,000 fewer theaters, with only a fraction of the budget and without the backing of a major studio. The box office success has been heralded as a win for conservatives and Christians, and a victory against the secular left. In short, for a segment of the US population, the movie is a sensation. Or as Krevels put it in his post-credits message, quote, "I think we can make The Sound of Freedom the Uncle Tom's Cabin of the 21st century." Now this brings up an interesting thing here, is whether or not did Disney kill the film, directly or not. So a viral tweet claimed Disney owned the rights to the film after buying 20th Century Fox Film Studios in 2019, but did not release it. Now, Newsweek, trying to do the thing that they do, which is contact people for comment, reached out to the Walt Disney Company and by email to confirm if it had acquired the rights to the film in 2019. The magazine wanted to clarify that Disney decided not to release the movie, and if so, what the reason was for shelving it. A Disney spokesman told Newsweek an international deal for the film's distribution had already been done prior to its acquisition of 21st Century Fox. The spokesperson said that, quote, "Disney Studios had no specific knowledge of the film, given the nature of the international acquisition pre-merger." The Walt Disney Company announced its acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2017, and that was completed in 2019. The acquisition meant Disney would automatically acquire the license to 20th Century Fox's film and television studios, cable entertainment news networks, and international TV businesses, and Hulu. One other thing that we should note here is that the producer of the film and the director of the film tried to get the rights to the film back prior to the shelving and had to wait until basically 2021 through legal hurdles and everything else like that to get the rights of the film back. So that belies maybe some of the issues. Disney 21st Century Fox could have released the film had they wanted to, but they shelved it for some reason. They didn't obviously the film still got released, so they didn't release it themselves. They sold the rights back to the film producers or just gave it back. I don't know the details of that because I'm not really a movie nerd. So I don't know those details, but the film clearly got released. It took, 4 years to get released. But after a merger and acquisition, there had to be like some sort of, well, we don't want to publish the film because of whatever reason, which they have not disclosed. We don't want to publish the film. Let's negotiate a deal for you to get the rights back. That could take 2 years. So why didn't that happen? I don't know. That's between the lawyers to decide and whether or not there's an NDA. I haven't looked up too much into it. All I've seen is that Disney has not said why it wouldn't release the film, which leaves rank speculation to fill in the gaps. Some people, especially those in the QAnon realm and the far right, think that the Hollywood elites are trying to suppress this movie from going to market. If that was the case, they wouldn't have sold or given the rights back. They had no obligation to. They had the licensing rights. They could have just sat on them and never did anything with it. There might have been some stipulation if the movie wasn't released within X number of years, then it had to automatically go back, which means that they would make more money by releasing the film potentially than just selling it back because it would automatically go back to the rights holder. I don't know what the contract said. This is just a possibility. But I don't think that it's this elite cabal trying to hide the truth. I think what happened is that Disney didn't want any of the shit around this film that we're seeing happening right now. The film's star is a QAnon conspiracy theorist, or at least playing one up for the crowd. Don't know which one, both are bad. Okay. There is a large amount of controversy surrounding the film because of that. There was people online, both left and right, politicizing the film over US politics due to the fact that QAnon is a conspiracy theory that has a lot of pull still. A brand like Disney isn't going to want to have to defend some film like that. So they're not going to want to publish it under their brand. That's it, in my opinion. That's the only thing that happened. It's not a conspiracy theory about why this is the case. Another thing that needs to be mentioned here is that the film is doing fairly well. But it's doing fairly well because of activists buying tickets and giving them away for free. Doesn't matter if a theater is full or not if every single ticket is sold, because what they'll report is the box office numbers. And those box office numbers look pretty fucking good when you have conservative activist groups and QAnon people and other narrative building political operatives trying to create a narrative around a film to go against your political enemy that is Disney for some reason now, probably because Disney's no longer a Christian only network or a Christian friendly, explicitly friendly network, to take them down a peg. So they're buying up the tickets, giving them away for free, and people are going to see the movie and being influenced by that. Again, the movie is probably fine. I have nothing against the film whatsoever. If it wasn't for these political narratives, I wouldn't even probably be talking about it because it's just would have been a blip on the radar, and it's not the first time that these movies have been produced. We had an entire category of Chris Hansen going around and busting PDFs, okay? PDFs. We had that. So this is like, the movie to me isn't like a new concept. It's based, what makes it new is that it's based on something that actually happened. So that's kind of new. But it's not like there's this like giant cabal to like suppress it. But there is a giant cabal trying to artificially promote it by buying the tickets, having these people come talk at Q events, and going online and talking about how liberals want to like suppress the movie by turning off the AC in this theater and we can't watch it or whatever. It's nonsense. And you shouldn't stand for it. If you're a fan of this film, if you're a fan of the kind of thing that this film is trying to do, you should be upset that they are politicizing this narrative as much as they are. And it was politicized before it hit mainstream news. They were promoting it at QAnon events prior to the fact that it was released. It had a built-in audience of those people, and those were the people that were promoting the film everywhere. I found out about this film probably 4 or 5 months ago for being just online and being a loser that's terminally online and likes to read things from every different kind of social media that I can think of, and it came across my feed. It's what it is. And the political narrative is dangerous. It's dangerous to victims of trafficking, and it's dangerous to the cohesiveness of the country. So we have, but the other thing that we wanted to say here, that I wanted to say here, is that liberals and lefties are falling for this propaganda. They're falling into the trap once again. And the way they're falling into the trap is that they were not doing what I'm doing. They're not attacking the narrative that is surrounding the film. They are attacking the film and its producer itself, saying that it's made up. Some are saying it's made up bullshit. Some are saying that it is just one giant QAnon conspiracy theory meant to promote a political narrative, and that nobody should believe anything that the film and its advocates say. They are falling into the trap because, as we watched in the beginning of this program when we started to talk about it, this event that this is based on actually happened. More or less. There, again, some exaggerations, not the point. Okay? And by attacking the film directly, instead of the narrative surrounding it, instead of the political operatives hijacking the narrative for political ends, they're attacking the film itself, which turns people off and makes us look like, as liberals and lefties, people that want to defend PDFs. So if you're going to attack anything surrounding this movie, please, for the love of fucking God, attack the narrative. Don't attack the film. I know that some of you are probably thinking this is a distinction without a difference, but it is important. You can say, hey, all those tickets that are being sold, a lot of them are bought by a conservative activist group. Isn't that interesting? Why do you think they're doing that? Why would a political group buy tickets to a movie to make it look like it's doing really well? What do they have to gain from it? Are they giving away every single ticket that they buy? Or are most of them not being procured by anybody? Isn't that interesting? Don't you think that that is maybe be a problem? You know damn well that if George Soros was promoting some film about racism in the United States and buying tickets to give away for free, you would have a problem with it. So why don't you have a problem with this? It's the same thing. That's how you attack the narrative going around it. You acknowledge the problem that the movie is actually showing. And if you want to be like us because you like to be accurate, you can be like, hey, the movie makes some exaggerations. It doesn't really detract from the message, but you should know that. You should know that, hey, you know, kids aren't necessarily, like, kids are kidnapped off the street. That's not mostly how it happens. Okay? You can do those things. In fact, I encourage you to do those things. That's why I did those things just now. But then you talk about the narrative. And you say how the narrative is wrong. And you say basically everything I just said. Point to the fact that political operatives have hijacked this issue and are turning it into a political weapon against their opponents. And it's dangerous for the victims of human trafficking. But with that, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Now, if you are new to the News Roundup, you don't know that we like to close out our news with some news of the weird. And this segment is, we're going to have to mute this, so we have to do it at 1:16. And this segment is a little bit about technology, and we're going to, okay, hold on. All right, so my bad. So this is a segment, News of the Weird, with AI robotic ambassador at a July 6th tech conference. So we're going to go over to this video and just give it a looky-loo. They are the images of my nightmares. We've seen these things. The robot dogs from Black Mirror. We're going to mute this just in case, the video, just in case there is copyright issues with the song playing in the background. We're going to give it a little watch. Look at that. Look at it's a robot dog. The robot dog. Oh, what is this? That is a robot person. Captured in Geneva, where the UN Technology Agency is set to hold a high-tech conference. Back in 2015, the UN set a series of sustainable development goals, hoping to reach them by 2030. Look at this, like all the robots are here. And this is cool, man. Like, these robots are going to help with accessibility, etc. Oh, the narrations explains it? Okay, so we're going to start over. I didn't know it was, my bad. All right. Start it over. We'll
no, this isn't the next big tech, AI, or robotics convention. These robots have only recently arrived in Switzerland, and their goals are global and political. This video was recently captured in Geneva, where the UN Technology Agency is set to hold a high-tech conference. Reuters reports that back in 2015, the UN set a series of sustainable development goals.
I believe this is an AI voice. Just FYI.
Hoping to reach them by 2030. Now, most believe those goals to be a pipe dream, which is why these robots are set to appear, hoping to highlight the strides humanity has taken since initially setting those goals 8 years ago. The robotic attendees include some superstars in the field, like Amica, a robot designed with an AI conductor, and which features lifelike facial expressions, as well as Nadine, a robot designed to remember human faces and interact with and provide care for the elderly, among others. The UN has already
Nadine has already been deployed in Japan, if I remember correctly, or a very similar robot has, and old people view them as human for whatever reason. They did some studies on it, and it could be that old people's eyesight aren't as good as it is, or they have But we're talking, when I say old people, we mean like 65 plus. Okay. Maybe even the 70s. I don't remember the age cutoff, but it wasn't like people that were in their 50s, 55, 60. It was 65 plus at the youngest 65. But they actually interacted with them, and it helped reduce instances of depression and things like that within a nursing home or just generally out and about on the street. They had conversation with them, and the people that did it reported a increase in happiness for that. And so it's just interesting. It's really interesting for that one.
Employed artificial intelligence in helping them identify areas that will be affected by food scarcity before it even happens. They are also in the process of developing new unmanned vehicles for delivering aid to hazardous areas around
the world. So that is that. So with that, everybody, I am sad to say that we are out of time. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed with us to the end. So please smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. If you want to come onto our show or anything, there's numerous ways to do that, but the easiest is to join our Discord. Link above or below, depending on where and when you are watching this. And we're going to be doing Discord contest and Discord only events on there when I don't feel like streaming, but want to hang out with y'all, playing video games or what have you. So please join the Discord. Special thanks to you, our viewers, for coming on and watching this program week after week after week. Because without you, I would just be a guy shouting into the void of the internet. And while that is fun, it's not as fun and as engaging as having you all watch this and converse with me. Special thanks to Nikki Adams, our producer, who helps write or does write all of the copy, depending on the subject. Without her, this program would not be as in-depth and thorough as it is. So Nikki, thank you as well. Special thanks to our Facebook and Discord communities who help us source a lot of this information by sharing news articles and the like, hence the name Crowdsourced Politics and everything else like that. We are going to be doing a video essay on AI. We're going to be doing a video essay on other stuff in the future, once a month, maybe once every other month. So be sure to tune into that either on YouTube or on podcast streaming apps. We also are going to bring back Cipher State, Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy focused podcast. And again, we are going on debates. I got, during this program, invited to another debate, and so I'll be reaching back out to that person that invited me on to talk about that. So with that, everybody, again, I am sad to say this is time for us to go. I am Cypher, host and moderator of Crowdsourced Politics, and as we always say, keep your head up through the political storm.